Silicon Valley isn't all it's cracked up to be. Next up is Plum founder and CEO David Koretz on why, after surveying the nation's tech capitals, he decided to call Miami home.
I am the founder and CEO of Plum, which is a Miami-based startup, but we're still operating in stealth mode. So I'm not going to talk about Plum today. Instead, I'm going to talk about why I made the decision to leave Silicon Valley last year and create a new company here in Miami. The truth is, I actually never expected to give this talk once, let alone twice. Last week, Dave McClure and the team at 500 Startups invited me to give this talk at his event. And then just recently, The Atlantic invited me back to give it again. So, for any of those in the audience that have been to both conferences, the next 15 minutes is going to be entirely 100% repetitive. If any of you have photographic memories, though, I would love for you to speak along with me in perfect harmony. All right, so with that out of the way, I want to spend the next few minutes talking about why I made the decision to leave Silicon Valley and move to Miami. I'm not sure, by the way, why they called myself Ideas Out Loud. The rest of the talks were also out loud. I am, in fact, loud, though. This is not their microphone. This is my personal microphone that I bring along with me in case I find an audience willing to listen. I'm even flexible on the willing part. But as background, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I started my first company when I was 14 years old, doing distribution of consumer electronics and computer products out of Asia, the Pacific Rim, into the US market. And at 19, I was embarrassingly named the entrepreneur who will change the world by Teen People magazine. And I think we can all agree there is no more auspicious and credible identifier of world-changing entrepreneurs than Teen People magazine. For extra credit, my boss at Juniper Networks actually found the magazine and created life-size copies for our office. So most recently, I was the founder and CEO of Mykonos Software. It was a company that created the idea of intrusion deception. And the idea was that instead of trying to block attackers from breaking into governments and networks and banks, what if we could deceive them? What if we could actually start to manipulate those hackers and block them? And it turned out that that technology had immense far-reaching ramifications. And in 2012, I sold the company for $100 million to Juniper Networks. And after that sale, I went to Juniper. I started by running their advanced technologies group. And then ultimately, I was promoted to run all of products and strategy for the billion-dollar security business. But in March, I made the decision to leave Juniper, retire, and then decide, even stranger, to move to Miami. Now, I'm pretty sure everybody else tries to move in the other direction. So I want to talk a little bit about why I made that decision. But before I do that, I went around to a lot of the venture capitalists that I had known in Silicon Valley and said, here's what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? And so I wanted to start by sharing some of the incredibly supportive, positive, and reassuring comments I got. The first venture capitalist told me that you are halving your odds of success by moving there. The next one was even less complimentary. He said it's like you're literally willingly moving from the farm team, from a major league to a farm team. But my favorite quote came from a famous venture capitalist and sometimes asshole who said, I would fund anything you do, but not if you're going to wear white shoes and a members-only jacket while you do it. So it wasn't a positive reception. And then I told him I was going to go into the wine business. And my friend, who's also a great VC, said, you literally picked the worst industry I can think of. Now, it's that part that's strange to me, because the thing that I've always found crazy about venture capital is that by definition, it's a contrarian business. And yet every venture capitalist I meet is the same 30 to 50-year-old white dude who graduated from one of the same two schools and pretty much wears the same outfit. So maybe before we think different, we can at least agree we should start by dressing different. But seriously, if you look at great investments, they always seem contrarian at the time. Nobody was excited about the taxi business before Uber and Lyft transformed the industry. No one gave a shit about your home handicrafts until Etsy proved it was an amazing company. And for sure, no one was really interested in you renting out your dirty couch until Airbnb transformed the business. Yet, venture capitalists continue to suffer from groupthink. They're always chasing industries only after somebody has already identified and transformed the industry. And that, to me, strikes me as entirely and totally counterintuitive. So I want to spend a few minutes sharing what I saw in Silicon Valley and what I'm seeing right now in Miami that caused me to make this move. So I thought I'd start by giving at least a little bit of context in terms of what I think is happening in the Valley right now. And the first part may seem kind of odd that an entrepreneur would be scared about large check sizes. Shouldn't this be a good thing? But every entrepreneur that I know worth his salt knows this same secret, that fundamentally too much cash kills companies. There's a fundamental bias that you have that the more cash you have, the easier it is to start rounding corners. The easier it is to make shortcuts. The harder it is to convince a small team that they should be doing everything they can to save money when you have 20 million extra sitting in the bank. I've raised businesses that have too much cash and too little. My most successful exit was by far the poorest funded. The second thing that I see is that you start having a problem in the Valley around recruiting. And we talked earlier about engineers. It might be true. Maybe there aren't as many great rockstar engineers in Miami that there are in Silicon Valley. But here's the reality of Silicon Valley. They're at least 2x more expensive. I just talked to a friend of mine who's at one of the hottest venture capital funded companies. He's telling me that they have between a 15% and 20% close rate on engineers. Right? They're losing 4 out of 5. How do you build a business if you can't hire the people you want? So the theory of having great engineers isn't useful if the practical reality is you can't hire them. And everyone in the Valley knows there's a sucking sound coming from Twitter, from Facebook, from the 5 or 6 companies that we'll talk about. So that to me is a huge issue. On the backside, it's equally bad. I sit on a bunch of boards in Silicon Valley, and I have some of the craziest conversations I would never have imagined. I had a conversation for 20 minutes over what type of espresso machine we needed in our office to be able to bring in newer engineers, and whether or not 8 or 12 funded company lunches and dinners was the right number. I don't know how you build a great company in that type of climate, and the attrition rate on the backside means that you're bringing on talent, educating them, and having them walk out the door. I don't know how that becomes a credible thing. But there was one thing more than anything that I actually thought was most egregious of all. And it's this weird, crazy Valley obsession with unicorns. This is a true story. When I sold my company, we were a $100 million exit. We had invested $4 million in January of 2012. February 13th, 33 days later, we sold the company, and our Series A investors made 600% cash-on-cash returns in 33 days. No, please. The IRR was a little over 500 million%. But the thing that's interesting is not the positive thing. What I actually want to share was the other side. The next morning, I got a call from one of our lead investors. And it wasn't a congratulatory phone call. He called to tell me what a fuck-up I was. He said, "You should have built $1 billion business, and I'm really disappointed that you sold so early." I wasn't feeling particularly apologetic that day. And so it caused me to write a blog post that I started sharing with people, and I actually started searching and researching the numbers and trying to get a sense for when do you exit? Because it's one of the great questions that every entrepreneur needs to ask is, how do you know when to exit? Do you exit early or do you exit late? And so I wanted to share with you the numbers, because often this conversation are unicorns, and I just found out there's a new term they made up called decacorn. Hopefully there's a dumber term they'll come up with soon. But let's talk the numbers. So there are 1,300 venture capital firms operating in the US today that are active. Those venture capital firms fund between 3,000 and 4,000 companies every year. Between 0 and 6 of them will reach $1 billion value ever. Let me make sure we understand those. 1,300 companies investing in 4,000 startups, and between 0 and 6 in any calendar year will touch $1 billion valuation. Or put another way, most VCs have a better odds of living in the fucking castle in the background than they do in investing in a unicorn. I would argue that chasing mythical creatures is not a brilliant investment thesis. What it ends up having happen is this bizarre obsession is driving a lot of great $100 million exits right into the ground. There are fundamental limitations on businesses. If you overfund a business before it's ready, if you force a business to invest beyond its reasonable exit opportunity, all you're going to end up doing is ruining a lot of $100 million exits instead of chasing mythical creatures. So with that backdrop, I want to present you with an alternative view. Now, I just realized last night that I've been in Miami 9 months, and I've yet to be at the beach or a nightclub. This is actually the closest I've been to a beach today. So it wasn't a quality of life exercise. I did not come here because I wanted to hang out. I didn't come here because I wanted to retire. I came here because I thought it was a good place to build a business. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. And I think more important than anything else is that capital goes twice as far. So I take a different view. My view is that in the very first 12 to 24 months, when you're starting a company, when you're growing a company, the most critical thing you can do is actually keep your burn rate low, because I don't believe there's a way to rush product market fit. I've watched a lot of startups, some with a few $1 million in capital, some with a few $100,000. I've seen others with hundreds of millions. You cannot rush product market fit. All you end up doing is accelerating your path into the ground. So to that end, the second thing I saw was this incredible combination of talent. And there are some great engineering talent here. I believe that's true. There are schools, as Nico mentioned earlier. But there's also companies like Citrix and other companies out here. Motorola has a huge presence here. And so I do believe there are great engineers here. We've already hired several that we're really proud of. And the second thing I think is that this combination of sales and marketing talent is pretty lethal. And I think that Miami's ability to be able to build a sales and marketing side is one of the most underappreciated sides of it. Think about it for a second. In Silicon Valley, everything's about product. Everything's about technology. But how many technology products have you watched that never really got there because they didn't know how to tell their story? They didn't know how to scale their sales organization. They really didn't understand how to message the business. So in my opinion, it's not a technology problem alone. It's equally important to have a great sales and marketing capacity, and that's one thing I think Miami does a whole lot better than Silicon Valley. So the other thing that we found is that we have an enormous recruiting advantage. As I've called up old friends of mine in Rochester, New York, where I grew up, and said, how do you feel about the fact that it's snowing in April, and it's 80 degrees in Miami, and we'd love to have you come down here, and without question, we're getting an immense amount of interest. I think what they talked about earlier is true, but I think it goes one step further. The ability to have a town that people want to visit makes it a hell of a lot easier to recruit, to convince people it's a town where they probably should also live. And so the other thing, and I think this is the most important thing for me and probably the most surprising, is that it's a culture that more than any other place I've been really wants you to win. So when I got here, two guys basically introduced me to every entrepreneur in town. A guy named Matt Hageman, who was up here earlier from Knight Foundation, and Nico Berardi from AGP. And between those two guys, within a few weeks, I had met every entrepreneur that had a $100 million exit, $1 billion exits, an amazing group of people. A group of people I probably wouldn't have been able to have easy conversations with in Silicon Valley because there's so many $100 million exits. But within a few weeks, I'd had lunch, dinner, or drinks with every single one of them. A few weeks after that, most of them started to become close friends. And every entrepreneur knows the same secret, which is it's the loneliest job in the world. I often describe it as forced manic depression. Your lows are going to be lower than you've ever had, and your highs will be higher. I was doing an interview earlier, and I was explaining to them the pain that you feel when somebody doesn't like your product on Twitter is probably underestimated by anybody that you can see. You can't really describe the feeling of the gut punch you get when someone doesn't think your baby is as pretty as you do. And having that support network is really, really helpful. That said, there are some problems in Miami, and I thought it would be fair to be balanced and talk about those too. The thing that was really crazy to me is that I sent out 3 emails to accelerators when I first moved here and I wanted to open an office space. Now, I'm used to real estate people, and I say this with deference to those of you in the room, being the most email-addicted, transactional animals on the planet. And yet, 24 days later, 2 of them had still not replied. I had signed the lease with Bureau, one of the startup accelerators here that I ended up going to, and 25 days later, I got an email from someone saying, hey, I heard you're interested in office space, without even a mention that it might be a little odd to send an email a month after I actually did it. I think if Miami is going to get to that next level, part of it is recognizing the pace that startups have to move at and starting to get the city to move at that pace. I also worry right now a lot about the angel investment climate. People talk about it in Miami as if it's a fantastic thing. I don't really believe that's true. Access to capital is great. It will certainly help us grow businesses, but only to the extent that we actually fill the middle of capital. And what I mean by that is, it's not hard to raise $100,000 in Miami now. That's great. That wasn't true 5 years ago. It's probably not that hard to raise $1 million in Miami. That's also great. The issue is what comes next. So right now in the Valley, you have this huge gap. People often talk about it as a Series A crunch. And the reason that exists is because late-stage capital will travel. If you're going to cut a $50, $100 million check, if it's in Miami or if it's anywhere else, you'll make that trip. If you're cutting $1 million check, you're likely going to come local. The issue is there is a total lack of high-quality Series B and C or even late-stage A investors that can cut a $4, $5, $6 million check. And a lot of the angels that are out there that are cutting $100,000 checks are going to find themselves with a gaping hole of a portfolio where they don't have enough cash to drive them through to the next level, and yet they aren't far enough along that they're going to be able to raise money from the VCs that are not here. And so that's probably the thing that scares me more than anything else. But that said, I came here because I believe there is an unbelievable window of opportunity that exists in Miami that I think will be here for the next 5 to 7 years. But my thesis is that just like in everything else, all the white guys that are 30 to 50 years old from the same 2 schools in the same clothing are going to see the same opportunity we see. They're going to come in, and returns will always normalize like they always do. Thank you very much. So I have about 4 minutes left, and they asked me if I would take some questions. So at this point, I'll open it up. I have only about 4 minutes, but happy to answer any questions that people have. Right here.
Hi, I'm Alice Robertson. I'm the head of the Miami Downtown Development Authority. So how do we get more people like you to come to Miami?
I think part of it is just showing them the opportunity, right? I think there's this general view, and I shared it with you because I thought it would be helpful to understand about how people think about Miami externally. And I think what they tell you versus how they really feel, and I shared kind of what they really feel, it's pretty ugly. And so I think people view it as a place to party, not a place to build companies. And I think that's dangerous. So I think part of it is you've got to show them the visible approach and the visible startups that are here. And I think you have to show them the momentum that's here. Because I do believe there's a really interesting core of momentum that wasn't here when I visited 5 or 10 years ago, that is here now. And so I think, for me, I would start organizing trips to let people start seeing the energy going on here, the businesses that are being created here. There's a lot of people that I was surprised to meet here that have done big $100 million plus exits, and yet I don't think we organize well enough yet to get external people to come in and see that. So I think we need to do that. Sorry, question over here?
Michael Hall with Digital Grass. One of my questions is, now that you've been here, what do you think are the best 3 verticals that should be focused on in Miami?
That's a really tough question to answer, because if you look at Magic Leap, for example, the guy did a $1.5 billion exit in biotech, basically pharmaceuticals. And now he's doing, well, from what we know from in the press, some sort of 3D virtual reality type of thing. I think a lot of times if you have a really strong founder, that will pull money in. So I actually haven't had a hard time raising money here. I've actually had the opposite experience. I've had more money than we'll end up taking. But part of it was I turned to people and said, look, either you're going to fund it at our valuations or we'll fund it ourselves. So we have that threat of we're willing to put our own money in and bet with our own money, and I think that changes the dynamic. But I don't think it's vertical specific. I really believe that obviously there's the Latin American draw, but I do believe you can create any great company anywhere. I've never subscribed to the theory that you can only have certain verticals be successful in certain places. I just don't believe that's true. So, any other questions? One right here.
Good afternoon, Andy, with in South Florida. Have you already had our arroz con frijoles?
I'm sorry, have I what?
Have you already had our arroz con frijoles?
Oh, I've not, no.
9 months? This is fantastic. I think I speak for a lot in the room. We've had an incredible 8 hours here. How can we keep this going? Is there a list of people that are in the room that are attending? Is there a forum? Is there anywhere where the ideas can keep flowing? Anywhere we can continue to ask the questions? Anywhere that we can continue to give you ideas and other people in the room?
So I'm far from the mayor of Miami. I just got here a few months ago myself. But I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that question. But I think there are groups that are doing that. I think the work that AGP is doing around angel investing is great. I think we need to keep that up. I think Nico probably has the same awareness I do of that, what happens for that next tranche of capital, and I think he and others are working to solve that. I think it's great to keep the conversation going, but I'm not quite sure I'm the right person to do it. Any last questions? One over there. Next to nothing. What I'll share with you is what I've shared before, which is highly cryptic, which is to say, after I sold my company, I bought a vineyard and an estate up in Napa Valley. And when I started looking at the wine business, it felt to me like one of those really fucked up businesses that was in need of some changing. There's a few things about wine that I thought were crazy. The first statistic, and I'll just share with you a few statistics, I'm not going to tell you what we're doing. Every year, $15 billion gets poured down the drain in wine. And that's because for 300 years, we've been making 750 milliliter wine. We pull out the cork, the wine oxidizes, and then you pour it down the drain the next day. Think about the rest of your lives and how incredibly archaic and stupid that really is. 15 billion of waste is incredibly ridiculous, and I think that has to change. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is 37 billion bottles a year of wine are put into these heavy glass bottles. They're corked. They're then shipped to distributors. The distributors ship them to retailers. The retailers ship them to you. All with the theory that you guys are going to lay them down for several years. You're patient. You're going to wait 5 or 10 years, and then you're going to pull the cork. Turns out that's total bullshit. 88% of people will open the bottle in the first 24 hours. 93% by the end of 5 days. So it turns out that the entire industry is shipping 30 billion bottles for no purpose at all. And so what we're doing is we think we can build something that changes both that consumer experience and ultimately maybe can stop some of that waste. So I'm out of time, but thank you very much. Really appreciate it.